The code we have thus far is not bad and it does its job. And if our application were as simple as it is here, it would be perfectly fine. But in bigger applications, and maybe even in this one, we already have a quite big component with a lot of code that is only indirectly related to the user interface. Of course, we want to send a request when a button is clicked and we want to display that response data. But for example, transforming the result, transforming the data, we can do it here. It's not inherently bad, but it is a nice practice to outsource that into services. So that services are the parts in your Angular application that do the heavy lifting, the dirty work, and your components are relatively lean as they can be, and are mostly concerned with template-related work. So with things like the isFetching property and so on. And therefore, let's create a new service now, the posts service here. And I'll create it by exporting a class, posts service, and we need to provide that. And for that, we can use two approaches. We can use @injectable, which you need to import from @AngularCore. And there we can pass in an object and set provided into root, which is the more modern and recommended approach. But you could also provide it here in the providers array of the app module, and this also wouldn't be bad or a problem. Here, however, I will use this approach. Now, what's my idea behind that service? In this service, I want to have my HTTP request methods, so the methods that do the HTTP requests, and I only want to get the responses or the message whether we're done with the request in my front end. So therefore, in this service, I will add a new method, create and store post. You can, of course, name this however you want. And there I expect to get a title, which is a string, and the content, which is a string, as an argument, let's say. And here I want to send my HTTP request. Now, of course, I also want to be able to fetch my post, so we'll add fetch posts here. And there I also want to send a request. Now, of course, I only want to move my code over. That's in the end what I want to do here. So let's grab that HTTP request here from onCreatePost, and let's move it into the posts service here. Now we're sending the HTTP request here. However, for this to work, we need to inject the HTTP service into this post service. So let's add a constructor. And with the help of that constructor, we inject the HTTP client and we store it in a property named HTTP. And the HTTP client is imported from @angular/common/HTTP. Now, of course, here we have no post data property anymore. I can create that here though. And this will, in the end, be of type post, and therefore it will have a title and so on, but we first of all need to import our own post model. So let's import post from ./post.model. And now to be a real post, we need to set a title property here, which is equal to our title we're getting as an argument. And we need to set a content property, which is equal to the content we're getting as an argument. So the right side of the colon refers to these arguments here. Now that's the post data we're sending. And now we can call create and store post to send that request. So back in the app component, I now need to inject my own posts service, private posts service, like this. And make sure to add that import path here at the top. You need to import post service from there. And now in onCreatePost, I simply call this post service create and store post. I get an error here because I need to pass some data to that method. I need to pass the title and the content. Now I get my post data here, so I access post data.title, and my second argument I send is post data.content. And with that, we should be able to create new posts. Let's add a new post here, the best Angular course, which this one hopefully is. I'm of course interested in your feedback, so I hope so. Send that post. Now we have no logic to automatically update our list of posts down there, but that's fine. We can click fetch posts again, and now we see our post here. So that now still works, but now the logic was outsourced into the posts service. Let's do the same for fetching posts. let's grab this logic here, and we'll have a problem with isFetching, but I'll come back to this. Let's grab this logic here and move it into fetch posts in the posts service like that. Now, let's remove isFetching and let's remove this loaded posts because we don't have these properties here and we don't really need them here in the post service. isFetching and the loaded posts clearly belong into our app component and not into the service because the component is where we use them, where we want to display them, or where we need them to change what we display in the template. Let's focus on the rest of this code for now. We're missing the map operator, so let's make sure we import that here. Let's import map from rxjs/operators. And with that, we have a request that should work, but we'll still need to fine-tune this later. At the moment, we can get rid of that private method here, of course, and instead, where we previously called this fetch posts, we can now use the posts service and call fetch posts there. So we do that here in onFetchPosts and in ng-on-init. However, what you will see, of course, is that now we have no posts available. Because whilst we're running that code in the service, and indeed you can see that if I click fetch posts, a HTTP request is sent, and we are fetching the posts, whilst all of that is happening, we're not seeing the posts here because we lost the connection between the data we fetched in the service and our template. Let's fix that. Now, to fix that, we have two possible ways of doing that. The first alternative is that we use a subject in the posts service where we next our posts when we got them, and we subscribe to that subject in the app component. And this would be a fine pattern, nothing wrong with that. The alternative, and maybe a bit more suited here, because the subject would be perfect if we have multiple components interested in the posts. That's not the case here. So a simpler and, for this scenario, better solution would be to simply return the result of our get method and of the pipe method thereafter. And that would be our observable. So I don't want to subscribe here. Instead, I only return the prepared observable here in fetch posts. And therefore, right now, no HTTP request gets sent because, as you learned, requests are only sent when someone is interested. So here I'm not subscribing. But now that I return this here, I can and I have to subscribe in the app component. So here where I call fetch posts, I can now subscribe again and I get my posts. And now here we can set this is fetching to false. And I want to set this is fetching to true here right before I start sending the request. And even more importantly, we can set this loaded posts equal to the posts we get back. And this is now the code snippet I can also copy to onFetchPosts. And yes, you could, of course, also outsource this into a separate private method again to avoid this code duplication here if you want to. So now we moved the result handling, so to say, into the component, but the more heavy lifting, the part detached from the template and from the UI, which is the sending of the request and the transformation of the data, that now lives in the service. And this is a best practice when working with Angular and HTTP requests. Move the part that is related to your template, which in my case here is managing the loading status and managing the loaded data. Move that into the component and be informed about the result of your HTTP request by subscribing in the component, but move the rest into the service and simply return the observable there so that you set up everything in the service, but you can subscribe in the component. Now, of course, I'm using a different pattern for creating a post. There, I am subscribing in the service, and this can be fine too. If your component doesn't care about the response and about whether the request is done or not, as it is the case here in our application, if the component doesn't care about it, then there is no reason to subscribe in the component. Then you can just subscribe in the service as we're doing it here. But if it does care about the response and the response status, as it does for fetching posts, then having that service component split is great. And now with that, if this reloads, you see the loading indicator again, you see the posts again, And now we have the best of both worlds, and we have a setup which you will see a lot and which you will work with a lot when you're working with Angular. Now that we had a look at how we can send requests, how we can post data, how we can get data, let's finish this basic request sending up by making sure that we can also clear our posts so that we can delete data. And for that, of course, definitely feel free to pause this video and try it on your own first. Try making sure that whenever this onClearPosts method runs, which will happen when we click that Clear Posts button up there, that whenever this method runs, that you send a request that deletes all the posts on the backend. You learned everything you need for that, so here's your chance to pause the video and try it on your own. Were you successful? Well, it's not that hard. It's almost the same type of request we sent before. Now let's keep the structure of sending the requests in the posts service. So in there, I will add a new method, which I'll name delete posts. Of course, you can name it also clear posts or whatever you want. Now in there, I will use the HTTP client because that is our central client for all HTTP requests we want to send from inside our Angular app. And there, we can now use the delete method, which will send a, delete request. Now this method requires a URL to which it should send the request, and since I want to clear all posts, I will grab this URL, which targets the overall posts node, and send my request there, so that all the posts there get deleted. Now if I want to be informed about that deletion process in the component, which in this case I want, but if you chose a different solution, that's fine too. But if I want to be informed in a component, I will return my observable here, and I will not subscribe here in the service, but instead now in the app component, in onClearPosts, I can reach out to the posts service and call delete posts, and since this returns an observable, we now have to subscribe here. Now, why do I want to subscribe here? Well, if I deleted all posts, I also want to clear my loaded posts array here in the component. So I will add a method here where I don't really care about the result of our request or of the response, but I know that this function here will only run if it succeeded, and therefore here I will then simply just set this loaded posts equal to an empty array again to reset it. And with these changes to the service and to the component, if we go back to our application and we let this reload, if I click clear posts, you see eventually it gets rid of all the posts, and on Firebase we also see that this posts node does not exist anymore. And of course we can still add new posts here. So all our old functionality still is there. The only thing we have, of course, is that currently we got no logic to automatically update our list down there once we added a new post. Now you can definitely score some bonus point if you implement this. I'll not do it here because it's not really related to the fetching of data, just to how you react to the sending of a post being done. So with that, we had a thorough look at different kinds of requests we can send. Now what if something goes wrong?